Well, welcome. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Many of you know Wayne. I'm Vicki Berry, the director here, and I welcome you to our Lunch and Learn for the Benjamin Harjo exhibition. And I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. You have to wait for me to read this whole page. Cassidy Petrazzi is a writer, curator, and master's candidate in the Department of Art History at Oklahoma State University. She is a contributing editor to Art Focus OK magazine, for which she's currently writing a preview of Tunde Darbe's upcoming exhibition at the Gardner Gallery at OSU. Petrazzi received her BFA from NYSCC at Alfred University in Alfred, New York, studying Pierre Bode in the Department of Expanded Media. Before arriving in Stillwater, Petrazzi worked in contemporary fine art galleries in New York City. Her most recent posts were associate director at Derek Eller Gallery and Exhibition and airfare manager at Pace McGill Gallery. Most recently, Petrazzi worked as an associate producer on George, a documentary portrait of Fluxus impresario George Maciunas. Thank you. One I didn't ask you to pronounce, how to pronounce. The film premiered, we were very excited about that, at MoMA's Doc Fortnight Festival in February 2018. In addition to that, this past summer, Cassidy was an intern with, no, a GMA intern at the Leon Polk Smith Foundation in New York. So I'm pleased to have her skills to offer research support for an important foundation to the museum. She's curating an upcoming exhibition of work by artist Zoe Friedman. This was a challenge I didn't meet, obviously, to open this winter at Medalla Art Gallery in Stillwater, of which Petrazzi is a board member. We're actually pleased to have feature Cassidy as the curator of the Ben Harjo exhibition, and I know she'll tell us her story. So, welcome, Cassidy.
This is working. And if anyone has their lunch, feel free to eat while I'm talking, which is why it's called Lunch and Learn. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. As Vicki mentioned, I'm a second-year graduate student in the Department of Art History. Last year I worked at the museum as a graduate research assistant and had the privilege of curating an exhibition of Benjamin Harjo's work, which we see in the Fisher Gallery. The exhibition presents a selection of more than 30 rarely seen works on paper and sculpture by Benjamin Harjo Jr., who is an absentee Shawnee and Seminole native. Drawn from several private collections, this exhibition explores how Harjo creates his place in the world. Through a connection to his own heritage and to the wider American and international Aboriginal communities, Harjo generates an individual perspective that is rooted in the past, informed by the present, and looking to the future. Harjo was both self-trained and educated at the Institute of American Indian Arts and at Oklahoma State University. He's known for his use of brilliant color and abstract and stylized renderings that portray subjects, be they human, plant, or animal, in imaginary and intricate environments. While Harjo's work has been celebrated in a number of exhibitions for its use of color, humor, and jewel-like patterning, this exhibition explores the artist's multifaceted, abstract, and figurative work that engages memory, place, and the natural world. When I started the planning for the exhibition, I began by scouring the internet and library for images and writing on Harjo's work, including exhibition catalogs and any relevant press reviews. While there has not been much, if any, scholarly work on Harjo's career, many of the articles I came across repeatedly referred to Harjo as the Native American Picasso. While this comparison can be seen as complimentary, I felt it was a somewhat reductive way of thinking about Harjo's work, which I felt should be considered on its own. In light of this, the one resource that was the most useful to my research and understanding of Harjo's process was the exhibition catalog, The Earth, the Moon, and The Stars Above, which I have right here, and we can pass around if anyone would like to look at it. That catalog was published by the Wheelwright Museum of the American Indian in Santa Fe, New Mexico, on the occasion of Harjo's first major retrospective exhibition in 2004. The catalog features more than 60 paintings, monotypes, woodcuts, and miniatures, along with the artist's own thoughts about each work. In planning for the exhibition as well, I also tried to contextualize Harjo's practice within the history of Native arts and exhibition culture in America and Canada, actually. And in doing so, one show I came across was titled Indigena, which was a then recent survey of Canadian Indigenous art curated by Leanne Martin and Gerald McMaster at the Canadian Museum of Civilization in 1992. The exhibition actually closed on the 500-year anniversary of Christopher Columbus's landings in the America, and the exhibition sort of talks about that relationship between the exhibition and Columbus's landing. In an essay titled Indigena, A Native Curator's Perspective, published in the 1992 Autumn Art Journal, McMaster wrote of the exhibition, quote, "Native peoples, and this includes artists, have inherited a system of representation that has caused considerable tension. Lacking opportunities to represent ourselves, Native people have had, historically, to play the role of the subject-object, the observed rather than the observer. Rarely have we been in a position of self-representation. Native peoples have always been the informant, seldom the interrogator or initiator. Native American art, particularly in the United States, has mostly been relegated to ethnographic galleries within museums or solely ethnographic museums. While there's a diversity of perspectives within the Native American communities who both welcome and challenge this categorization, it has effectively undermined the inclusion of contemporary Native art within exhibition venues and in the story of American art." In his essay, McMaster outlines a number of complex frameworks that he feels must be acknowledged to understand and explore the Native viewpoint. These frameworks include the following. First, the recognition of Native peoples, the Indian and the Inuit, as a founding nation of the Americas. Second, an acknowledgement of an exclusive history from European Americans. The recognition of a variety of social, cultural, and historical perspectives within Native cultures. Fourth, the consideration of Native languages, both oral and written, as a key to understanding differing aesthetic perspectives. Awareness of the cross-cultural influence on both Native and Euro-American art. Sixth, he believes the notion of quality must be expanded to include Native sensibilities. And finally, the understanding that Native art history has been seen as separate from mainstream Western art history. One current exhibition that is challenging the long-standing practice of relegating Native art to ethnographic galleries and museums is the show Art of Native America, the Charles and Valerie Diker Collection at the Metropolitan Museum of New York, which just opened this month. It'll be closing in a year, actually, so it's a pretty substantial exhibition. The exhibition marks the first time the museum has held a show of Native American art in its American wing. This radical change in venue at the museum was a stipulation to receive the gift from the Dikers, which is considered one of the largest, most rigorous, and comprehensive collections of Native art. The Diker collection features a diverse range of works by over 50 Native American cultures dating from the 2nd century to the 20th century. Of this, the Met's director Max Hollein has said, "The presentation in the American wing of these exceptional works by Indigenous artists marks a critical moment in which conventional narratives of history are being expanded to acknowledge and celebrate the contributions of cultures that have long been marginalized." In tandem with this exhibition, the Met has published a catalog that presents Native American art within the broader context of American art history. This is a watershed moment in America for Native art, a country that often has difficulty recognizing a multiplicity of histories, perspectives, and conditions, prioritizing a monolithic American colonialist history that whitewashes the long-lasting repercussions of manifest destiny. In curating this exhibition, in light of this complex history, my priority was considering the concept of visual sovereignty as it relates to Harjo. Visual sovereignty is defined as self-representation that counters stereotypes of Native peoples and reimagines indigenous expressions of self-determination and being. This is why the Wheelwright Catalog and my interviews with Harjo at his home in Oklahoma City were my guiding light in preparing the show and thinking about his work. Harjo's embodiment and expression of visual sovereignty evokes sacred connections that speak to the relationship between land, body, mind, and spirit, affirming the mutable nature of culture, identity, tradition, and self-representation. The title of the exhibition comes from a quote by the Japanese-American artist Isamu Noguchi. In 1987, when writing about his work, Noguchi penned, "We are a landscape of all we know." I felt that this statement aptly applies to Harjo's practice as well because his active engagement with the world is the main drive of his artistic imagination. Harjo's inspiration comes from the most sacred and banal of sources, including native creation stories, seminal patchwork, and everyday occurrences. Harjo is open to all forms of inspiration, even deriving of some works from the shape of a cereal box eaten for breakfast, roadkill he sees on the road, or the patterns of mud splatters on trucks seen while driving. While it's easy to ignore such banal sources of inspiration, repetitive and mundane acts affirm, care for, and create life. The sacred practices, rituals, and stories that informs one life carries as much weight as the everyday. All are connected by intention and care, creating a landscape of all we know. Harjo knew from a young age that he wanted to be an artist. Without any access to formal art classes in his high school in Bing, Oklahoma, Harjo happened upon Canadian-American artist George W. Brigman's pioneering work, Brigman's Complete Guide to Drawing from Life, which we also have here, if anyone would like to look at it. Brigman taught life drawing and anatomy to artists at the Art Students League of New York in the first half of the 20th century, and his lessons on breaking down the human face and body into planes and shapes were foundational for Harjo. One can still see the traces of these lessons in his most recent work. Woman of Color, which we see here, for example, utilizes this technique. The planes and shapes of the face form the subject's profile as she looks to a projected landscape dotted with figures in the background. Harjo's education at the Institute of American Indian Arts, which he began in 1964, was critical to his development as an artist. Traveling from his grandparents' home in Bing to Santa Fe for the first time, Harjo was exposed to museums, galleries, mentors, and other Native American students from all over the United States. IAIA's founding in 1962 presented a progressive and renewed opportunity to educate Indigenous Americans on their own terms. As Harjo recently recalled, the wonderful thing about the Institute was that it catered to a lot of artistic talent from all over the United States. It was an enclave of energy and creativity. I was able to see what another person was doing, hear about their tribal identities, to look at their artwork, and to be able to express ourselves without saying, "Oh, you can't create that because it's not your tribe." We were all exposed to a lot of ideas, a lot of ways of approaching art, and I think that was the most wonderful thing about it. The wide access and support that Harjo experienced at IAIA is something that has informed his work throughout his career. A mentor of Harjo's at the Institute was artist and educator Seymour Tubis, who had established the printmaking department at the school and chaired the department from 1963 to 1980. It was Tubis who introduced Harjo to the low-tech method of using the back of a spoon as a printing press for woodblock prints, a technique Harjo still uses today and that he also demonstrated in the programming a couple weeks ago. That mentorship was invaluable to the young artist, but from the outset, Harjo exhibited a fortitude in his own purpose and vision. In an interview with Julie Pearson Littlethunder for OSU's Oral History Research Program, Harjo discussed one of his first attempts at making a woodblock print. He cut out the same area in both blocks, which prevented printing, and was promptly dismissed from the class. He enrolled in a pottery course instead, but after one day of sitting with a lifeless lump of clay, he found himself back in the printmaking studio. Instead of forcing him out once more, the instructors understood Harjo's desire and refrained from further interference. That dedication to his craft and persistence of vision exemplifies the concept of visual sovereignty. It's Harjo's conviction of self-determination. Harjo is a serial draftsman. He's always sketching, looking, and reflecting, often engaging in this practice even during our conversations. Harjo typically begins his work in a contour drawing of pen or pencil and works by adding pattern, depth, and color, as well as layering detail, symbols, and meaning. Much of Harjo's rich patterning, if not derived purely from his imagination, stems from the art of seminal patchwork that he grew up with. The geometric patterns for rain, fire, and lightning that originate in the kaleidoscopic seminal textiles can be identified throughout Harjo's work. Harjo also creates his own language of ornamental patterns and shapes that are revisited and reappear in various works seen throughout the exhibition. Harjo uses abstraction to articulate an indigenous ontology that's deeply connected to nature, heritage, and history. While many of his works do not immediately read as landscapes, let's see, like this for example, they are indeed dynamic spatial environments of immersive pattern, color, form, and symbolism. Harjo's method of combining various elements and stories from diverse native tribes speaks to an imperative to preserve and present legends and sacred lessons to a new audience. In several works, one will notice a blank white background, as in this piece. While this may be simply an aesthetic decision made by the artist, the absence speaks to what was or could be present, a land and a history taken from native communities. 2, the blank background connects Harjo to a lineage of Native American artists who painted in the flat style, also called studio style or traditional Indian painting, that developed in the southwest in Oklahoma in the early part of the 20th century. Artists like Woody Crumbo, Jerome Tiger, and Harrison Begay used effortless contours, bold color, expressive patterning, and a lack of background in their work. Other pieces, such as the group of miniature paintings seen in the exhibition, depict Harjo's signature geometric patterning while also incorporating literal landscapes and figural portraits of indigenous men and women. These works, including Tied to the Earth, Images of the Land, and Beauty Among Us, are intimate artworks that depict a union of sacred land, people, and color into a single precious object. If you look closely enough, you might be able to identify places that are still protected today, like Bandelier National Monument in New Mexico, Colorado National Monument outside Grand Junction, Colorado, or Bear Butte in South Dakota. Harjo gives life to bygone ancestors and revered sites, infusing their presence in a rainbow of color and renewing their life in his work. The exhibition at the Met and the Walker Art Center's recent announcement, of an Indigenous Public Art Selection Committee, which developed from the Walkers' controversial decision to exhibit a public sculpture titled Scaffold by the contemporary artist Sam Durant, which was intended to commemorate the hanging of 38 Dakota men in 1868, tell of a shift occurring in America. The ultimate removal of Durant's sculpture, which was protested by the Dakota, removed from the Walker, dismantled, and given to Dakota elders who buried its remains, speak to a growing consideration of Native perspectives in the conversation of American art. It's an exciting time where we can see an inclusion of perspectives, voices, and histories challenging and expanding our understanding of Native American history and the art historical canon. Visual sovereignty is so critical to Native artists because it is a means to devise for themselves and then illustrate through their chosen media their own connection to the world and the meaning they find within it. It is the process of developing their own unique voice, as evidenced by this show. It's a process of developing their own unique voice. As evidenced by this show, Harjo is an inventor of a complex and layered visual language rooted in a connection to land, history, community, and the present. The work reflects a living culture, not a static historic entity, but one that is created by many interwoven forces. The work selected for the exhibition showcase a visual thinker and habitual draftsman who's creating new environments that imagine what it means to belong to the world today. Thank you. I'm happy to take some questions if anybody has any.
Just an observation, the miniatures that you show, of course, they're only this big in real life, and they're projected large. I haven't recognized the signature, how small that signature was.
Yeah.
Would you use a single odd brush to do that? That's
Yeah.
quite remarkable.
He spoke about all of these miniatures were initially made for his participation in the Indian market in Santa Fe. There was a competition for some years for miniatures, and part of the regulations of creating a miniature was that no figure could be larger than 1 1/4 inch, which is tiny. And he initially started making these works using a magnifying glass, but felt that it was easier for him to just do it himself, without any interference with any kind of glass. But they're incredible. I mean, I didn't even believe that they were painted by hand when I first saw them. Yes?
I have a question.
Yes.
I know that the artist has often said that he wants others to read into his work, and I was wondering if you could share a bit about any conversations you had with him about your vision for this exhibition.
Well, I kind of tried to leave things rather open with him in all of our conversations. I mean, I would go to each interview with a list of questions, but what I thought kind of was most useful was just kind of seeing how the conversation evolved. And he and I often would go around his house where he has a lot of the works up, and sort of just talk about what I saw, what he was intending on depicting. But oftentimes, speaking to that observation of him, he was much more interested in what I was talking about and, reflecting on than he was interested in sort of driving home some narrative. And I think that openness, is indicative of his own personality and behavior, but it's also a way of welcoming other people's involvement in his own work, as a way to sort of, speak to a multiplicities of meaning. The work is layered in a way that it can speak to a variety of experiences, and it can touch people that are both native and non-native. So that's one thing I really enjoyed about his work. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about how you made your selections
For the show?
for the show?
Sure, yeah. Well, the first process was going to Harjo's home and looking at what he and Barbara have decided to hold on to as part of their personal collection. I also really heavily relied on the Wheelwright catalog, and I was trying in this exhibition to show works that hadn't been shown before, because it seems like there was sort of a revolving suite of images that everyone is familiar with of Harjo's. He also had an exhibition at the Gardner Gallery in 2010, and so I wanted to show different work that hasn't really been seen in Stillwater before. So I kind of took note of everything that had been exhibited prior, and then visited Harjo's home and then a number of collectors, and just took images of everything and sort of tried to be as open as I could about what I was looking at. And then last winter at some point, I think it was, I printed all of the images that I had collected of Harjo's work, and I just sat with them on my living room floor and just started kind of playing around with things and moving images next to each other and seeing what kind of related to each other, at the same time that I was thinking about these concepts of heritage and land and community, and so trying to kind of see what spoke to me the most. I kind of knew immediately after seeing the miniatures that I wanted those to be a group in the show, because I just think that they're spectacular. And then everything else just sort of developed after I had seen everything, and sat with it for a while, you know, on the floor. My professors have always spoken about how you really have to just spend time looking at the work, and so that's what I tried to sort of prioritize, was just really sitting and experiencing the work for itself without trying to enforce any sort of narrative to it. And then for the layout, I was sort of thinking of the layout on each individual wall as a way of sort of an evolving story of his, and how very abstracted figures end up sort of developing into representational figures, or a very abstracted landscape ends up developing into a more sort of readable landscape. So, yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you.